Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. This is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror, but we now call the Long War. It's Monday, and my co-host today is Joe Trusman. Joe is an editor at FDD's Long War Journal, and Joe also covers all things related to Palestinian terror groups and the war in the Middle East. Joe knows it all. Joe, welcome back to Monday's episode of Generation Jihad.
Hey, Bill, I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem, Joe. Yeah, a lot to talk about today. A lot of interesting developments. So let's just dive right into it. So, Iran's president and its foreign minister were killed in a helicopter crash in the mountains of northern Iran. That's President Raisi is considered a very conservative member of the Iranian regime, and seemed to work well with Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Joe, is there going to be any impact in the war in the Middle East? What's happening with Israel in Gaza, Hezbollah, the Houthis? The Iraqi and Syrian Shia militias. Is Raisi's death going to change anything in the big picture or the small picture?
Right. Unfortunately, it won't. I don't think Raisi had really much to do with, with this arena, right? And he wasn't the person making the decision, right? We all know who makes the decisions when it comes to these topics of, especially when it comes to Israel, when it comes to the Palestinian armed groups and Iran's network of proxy militias in the region, right? It's Khamenei. So it's not Raisi, it's not the foreign minister or the entourage that was involved, that was in the helicopter crash. So, but nevertheless, it was it's very surprising what happened. Obviously, nobody was expecting something like this to happen, but in the end, I'll say this. I'll tell you what I've observed in my thoughts just very quickly here. When it comes to the foreign minister, who perished in the crash, he made post October 7th. He made a lot of trips abroad, visiting different armed organizations, especially Hamas. Right, so he was really the point man between a lot of these groups and Iran. So he's out of the picture. Right. However, when I say point man, I really mean that he was just, I think he was just the man that sent the messages between Iran's leadership and the armed groups. Right. So I don't think he was actually making any, actual strategic or tactical decisions. So we won't be seeing him anymore. But that won't change much. I think he'll be replaced like previous foreign ministers, or they're always been replaced, right? So yeah, I think that's where we're at right now. Obviously, there's some joy in certain parts of the world right now, following this news. But at the end of the day, it's not going to change much. I don't think Iranian militias or those groups backed by Iran, right, are going to change in any way. Everything's going to pretty much stay the same, unfortunately.
Yeah, Joe, you summed that up well. We all, as you said, power flows from Iran's supreme leader and down through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its Quds Force. That's where foreign policy is actually made, and where the military strategy and is executed. Iran has seen presidents and foreign ministers come and go. One of the things that people forget is that the presidents of Iran are, sure, they're elected, and you put that in quotes, but they're not elected in the manner that they are here in the United States or in Western countries. You're pre-approved to run for president, and you're approved by I believe there's a council for this. And I know that the Supreme Leader Khamenei ultimately has to sign off on who's going to run for office. So what that tells you is that if you're running for president, you're already accepted by the establishment, by the Supreme Leader and his followers. So while people can celebrate that, and there's certainly a lot of ink being spilled or spent on who's going to be the next president, who's going to be the next foreign minister for Iran. The fact is that the Islamic Republic of Iran is going to operate as business as usual. Nothing really is going to change. This is probably more of an inconvenience than anything for the Iranian regime. This isn't going to change anything on the battlefield. Those militias, the Houthis, the Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the bevy of Iraqi militias, they're taking their orders from the IRGC. The foreign minister was more of a messenger than anything else, and the front man. But the real power, emanates from behind the scenes in Iran. So, next item, interesting and bizarre, but this is sort of what we expect from the International Criminal Court. It put out arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as 3 Hamas leaders. You have Yahya Sinwar, of course, who's Hamas's leader in Gaza. Mohammed Deif Ibrahim al-Masri, who's the commander-in-chief of the military wing of Hamas. And then, of course, Ismail Haniyeh, who's the head of Hamas's political bureau. It's really hard to tell who's actually in charge of Hamas. There's so many titles. But, Joe, what are the implications of this? And, what exactly is the International Criminal Court doing here?
Right. So I think that's the big question. What is the International Criminal Court doing? I mean, it was just, I found it so, obviously I'm not a legal expert. I'll just give you my observations. I found it just very strange that the lead prosecutor would go on CNN to announce his intentions, right? To seek what he's doing. What they're doing is seeking arrest warrants, right? The ICC has not issued arrest warrants yet, right? But what he's saying, the lead prosecutor says that, all right, we're seeking. He goes on CNN, says we're seeking, arrest warrants for the 2 Israeli officials, obviously Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, and then the 3 Hamas leaders. And 2 of them, Sinwar and Deif, are in Gaza. Well, we think they're in Gaza. Heck,
there's some news that the Sinwar might actually not be in Gaza.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. He may be in
wouldn't be shocking.
Yeah, maybe in some tunnel under Egypt, and we can talk about that later. But nevertheless, and then Ismail Haniyeh, who is he's been ferrying between Qatar and Turkey. But yeah, so this is where we find ourselves right now. Obviously, something I don't agree with, and something else I've observed. Obviously, the Israelis are furious, and Hamas is as well. Hamas earlier today.
Finally, something they could agree on, right?
Yeah, right. They do agree on something. Hamas issued a statement basically deriding the ICC, or rather the lead prosecutor, for only issuing arrest warrants for 2 Israeli officials, even though these are the top Israeli officials, of course, the prime minister and the defense minister. And also, of course, that they derided the prosecutor's decision to seek arrest warrants for, but they said are the leaders of the resistance, right? But the interesting thing is that they don't actually, in the statement, they never named who it was. They never said it was Haniyeh and Sinwar and Deif. Nevertheless, everybody knows who they're talking about. So Hamas didn't like it, doesn't like it. Israel obviously doesn't like it. And, at the end of the day, let's just be honest here. Let's say arrest warrants are issued. Do you really think that Sinwar is going to get caught here? They're going to get arrested and brought to trial, and that's ridiculous. That's not going to happen, right? Most of this pressure is really aimed at if there is an actual arrest warrant issued, is on Israel, right? So, because I don't think Hamas really has to worry too much about getting arrested, their leaders getting arrested. So, because they don't. Generally, they travel, if they travel, right? If they do, it's going to be to friendly countries. And I'll tell you right now, these friendly countries are not going to bring in these guys to the ICC. So again, I think...
Joe, are you telling me that Qatar is not going to arrest Haniyeh? You don't think that's going to happen?
Yeah, right. I know. I know, right? So I think that's where we're at right now. things can change, right? Again, like I said, nothing is. This is arrest warrants have not been issued, but they probably will be. So there's still a lot to go through right now. But this is just the beginning. Whether it's going to work or not, I don't know. But I think a lot of these institutions overall, the UN, the ICC, the ICJ, they're just I don't know. It's all politically motivated, I think, more than anything.
And the bias that's stacked against Israel,
right?
A state that
course.
was attacked by Hamas and is responding to that attack.
Yeah.
For the request or the warrants, that they're issued at the same time. It's just it's a form of moral equivalence that
exactly.
It's just disgusting.
Exactly.
So like this is one of those cases where even Israel wins. The request for warrants for Hamas leaders comes across, it loses because it's top two leaders, and I think Israel has far more to lose in this.
Yeah.
As you noted, Joe, the Hamas is going to be sheltered wherever it is. Its host countries. If Sinwar did flee Gaza and he's in Egypt, or I've even seen rumors that he might be in Turkey. If that's true, neither of those countries are going to deport him. As we'd mentioned, Ania is just fine wherever he is, where he is. I'm sorry. Whereas, the president and the prime minister and the defense minister of Israel, they're individuals who travel, and they do have to worry about actually being arrested, and they have to concern themselves with where they travel now. That is, given, I'm not going to, look, I don't think that Netanyahu is going to travel to the United States and be arrested. But after what the U.S. has done over the last several months, if I was Netanyahu and his security team, I don't know that I could advise him to travel to the United States at this point in time. I'm not saying that would happen. Believe me, that is a almost in Nutterland conspiracy theory. But, if you would have asked me on October 8th if I thought the U.S. would not veto a resolution at the UN against Israel that harms it, cut off weapons supplies, criticizes it for trying to target Hamas, trying to dictate and cram tactics and strategy down its throat, the bad tactics and strategy, all of these things, I wouldn't have believed that either. So, we're in that part of time, where I believe just anything could happen. Again, not saying it's likely. It's probably, is it probable? Is it likely? No, but I wouldn't say it's impossible either.
Yeah. That's the scary thing. And we've seen threats by by countries, like I think South Africa was one, where it would arrest Israeli soldiers that that are also South African, right? If they would come to South Africa, right? So just stuff like that, we're seeing that. So it's very concerning. So, and I don't know, and the way things are going politically here in the United States, I don't know, maybe in 10 years, 15 years, things may be really different and may look really bad for Israel when it comes to who's politically in charge here, right? So it's because all the stuff we've seen over the last months with protests on campuses and things like that. In the Democratic Party, there's a growing contingency that are becoming very hostile to Israel, right? So
becoming the pro-Hamas party. I mean,
pretty much.
Again, Republicans criticized for holding back aid are called pro-Putin. What do we call, Democrats who want, right? We're doing the same thing with Israel.
Right. So, I don't know. That's my concern long term, at least. So, out of many of my concerns.
Listen, that's a whole podcast in itself, and probably one that we should have at some point. But I would say the mid and long-term prospects for Israel and its relationship with the United States are in great danger. The demographics with the youth demographics here in the United States, the support for Israel is not looking good. And, I think it's just, the fact that you have the, large segments of the Democratic Party taking what I can only describe as because it's a position that ensures the survival of Hamas, taking a pro-Hamas stance. And that's not a political argument. It's just what I see. And because look, anyone who knows me knows that I just don't like politics and don't like parties. I don't like taking sides in that ugly fight that's in Washington. Neither has very little to offer me. But here we are. Well, let's move on from that, Joe. That's a whole conversation.
Right.
And And let's say the situation in Rafah, the city on the southern border, where Israel is, there was much talk a week ago that Israel, has begun its operations, to eject and defeat Hamas in Rafah. Is that the case? Has Israel begun its operation, or is this sort of a slow, staged, gradual move into Gaza by Israel?
Yeah, no, I think you got it right. I think this is gradual. I think there are a lot more things to consider here in Rafah compared to previous cities that the Israeli military has moved on. Primarily the large population that has slowly been leaving Rafah over the last more than a week now, I think. And so the Israelis they've been operating in eastern Rafah, all right? And they are, but I think this will just be done in segments. I'm pretty confident that Israel is going to go all the way with this, okay? But they're just doing this slowly because they have to consider, despite the rocky relationship with the United States, they are considering the humanitarian issue, obviously the civilians, and we're hearing all sorts of stuff about they're really opening up a lot more aid into the Gaza Strip. The Israelis have opened more crossings. Then we have the lovely U.S.-made the pier, all right, which again, I don't have a problem with helping the needy and Palestinians that need support and need help. I just don't think the method, this pier, is the way to do it. It's just, we've talked about it, Bill. It's a huge target. And I'll tell you, we wrote about this on Long War Journal. There have been threats, specifically by one group. It's the third largest armed organization in the Gaza Strip, Popular Resistance Committees. They threatened to attack the pier. And actually, they renewed their threat just a few days ago about this pier, about attacking it. So the warnings are there, right? It's just a big fat target, unfortunately. There's American soldiers, or rather, maybe not exactly on the pier, but there are American soldiers involved in this with this pier. Obviously, Israeli soldiers as well. So, nevertheless, this Rafah operation is still progressing. The Israelis are finding things, right? Tunnels. They're finding infrastructure. They're destroying infrastructure. But the interesting thing here, I think, really more than anything, at least one of the top two things that interests me about this operation is how Egypt is reacting. And because I
brought this up, Joe. Yeah, this is a great point.
This is good. Yeah, I mean, really, because the thing is, my suspicion is this. My suspicion is that, and by the way, I want to say this very quickly. We've talked about this. Other colleagues at FDD have talked about this, and they bring up a good point with the subject. But my suspicion is that Hamas, or rather Egypt, has been playing kind of like a double game here, right? Where it has improved. It's since I'd say about 2018. It's become closer to Hamas, all right, and other Palestinian armed groups. And because it's been very involved with mediating limited conflicts between the Israelis and the Palestinian armed groups since 2018, and obviously now. But at the same time, they've maintained friendly relations, obviously, with Israel, which they have a peace treaty with, and obviously Washington. And I think I really suspect that there's Egyptian officials that kind of just look the other way when it comes to smuggling the tunnels underneath Rafah. And by looking the other way, Hamas and other armed groups have been able to bring in the weapons. And also, there have been reports that they've been ferrying fighters in and out of Gaza Strip for training in Iran, right? And that's very concerning. So if Israel finds hard evidence, right, that Egypt has been looking the other way, essentially, it's not going to look good. And also, let's be honest here. Let's be real. I can't imagine that Israel wasn't worried about the relationship between Hamas and Egypt. Let's say going back, like I said, 2018. I mean, it's pretty. Listen, Hamas leaders often refer to Egypt in their statements as a brotherly country, right? And they say brotherly country not because they're just being nice to Egypt, right? They're doing that because I think that there's Egypt is supporting them not only politically, right, with mediation, but also with the tunnels and who knows what else. So we're gonna see. It's still early, We're gonna see, but I think there could be a really nasty diplomatic spat here coming up, and I don't know how it's going to result. I don't know, but this Egypt Israel thing, Egypt Hamas Israel, it's not looking good. And I think the Egyptians are very nervous about that. That's why they've been really just vocal since the beginning of the operation, that and warning and joining this ICJ case with I think 6 or 7 other Arab countries that South Africa has brought about against Israel, and so we'll see. It's very interesting, but nevertheless, the Israelis are going. I think they're going to go into Rafah. They're going to destroy the infrastructure there. The infrastructure belonging to armed groups. They're going to start finding more data, more evidence, more intelligence, right? Especially in regards to finding the locations of hostages, Hamas leaders, and commanders. So it's all very interesting, but this is going to take time, folks. I'm going to tell you right now. I don't think this is going to be like a previous operations, and that's what worries me. I think this is going to take quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to read from a flash brief that you wrote at Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
Yeah.
Nearly 700 tunnel shafts have been identified in Rafah, from which approximately 50 tunnels cross into Egypt. These tunnels are used by Hamas to supply itself with weapons and ammunition, and could potentially use to smuggle out of Gaza hostages or Hamas senior operatives, end quote. And look, you don't put 50 tunnels going across that border without some type of support from Egyptian authorities, whether it's coming from the top or from people along the border. But, look, there's money to be made here. I'm sure that's happening. Yeah. And there's also ideological support that I have no doubt exists within elements of the Egyptian security services and some authorities. We don't know at what level this goes to, but this doesn't have 50 tunnels don't cross that border without someone in the security services knowing. And, I liken this a lot to what you're describing here is with Pakistan, with supporting the Taliban and other terror groups. Some of the people are making good money off of it. Some people are trying to forward, may not be true believers of the Taliban's goals, but affording Pakistan's foreign policy goals of, getting a measure of control in Afghanistan. And some of them were true believers in the cause, right? In the jihadist cause. And I suspect you have a lot of this going on within the Egyptian government and the military establishment.
Oh yeah. I suspect that there's money, a lot of money. I mean, some Egyptians have made a lot of money on this war. I can't say who exactly, but I can't specifically say who it is, but because people trying to cross from Gaza to Egypt, right through the Rafah crossing. I mean, I've seen numbers like $5,000 a person, right, to flee the war. That's ridiculous. So people, they're making money, and remember, Rafah is very important to the Egyptians, right? Because other than Israel, they're the only other country that has access to the Palestinians, right, to the Gaza Strip, and that kind of leverage is important for the Egyptians, right? So anyway, we'll see what they find. I think the Israelis are going to find a lot of stuff there, but we'll see what they say when it happens.
This is a real interesting aspect of this, and boy, I know the Israelis probably in some ways might need to look a little bit the other way, and if they can get assurances that this doesn't happen in the future, but boy, they have to be steaming within the Israeli establishment. Joe, you mentioned something about Israel, warning civilians to leave Rafah before the operation, begins. And, again, this is a phased operation, so it does give them time. A quick question here for you. Did Hamas warn civilians to leave southern Israel in the days and weeks leading up to its attack on October 7th? And after the attack, did it establish humanitarian corridors for the Israelis to get aid to the people that survived those attacks in those villages?
Excellent point. Yeah. No, obviously not. Not that I've seen, right? So
maybe that evidence will come out at some point because
right. Yeah, exactly. So that's a very good point. No, absolutely not. Of course not. I mean, it's a terrorist organization. They don't do that. So they don't care for anybody but themselves. Okay.
Who would have thunk it? Right?
They are there to ensure they are trying to survive, and that's it. And I'm talking about Palestinian armed groups. That's all they want.
this is what bothers me about the International Criminal Court, right? Look, we can debate mistakes Israelis have made in targeting and in their operations and whatnot, but to brand, to put them in the same bucket as a terrorist organization, right, it's just galling. And it's things like this, right? You see the efforts that the Israelis make, which in my estimation, I look at this and go, that's insane. And if I was running a military operation, that is not how I would do this. But I'm not in charge of Israel. And I see them doing this and I'm saying they're doing things contrary to their own interests here. And so, it's the hypocrisy. It's the double standard. It's the moral relativism. It's what we just grown to expect whenever we deal with anything related to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and all the other groups with respect to Israel. It's just so annoying, but it is. I mean, we have to deal with it. Joe, the Israelis said that they've recovered 4 bodies over the last several days. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that. And does Hamas? Do we think that Hamas has less hostage? I mean, it's hard for us to know, right? But what does your gut tell you about Hamas and its ability to hold on hostage? Does it have the hundreds? Are they alive, or do we think most of them are dead, or just don't know?
Right. So obviously, it's a difficult subject to talk about. Nonetheless,
very. Yes.
Yeah. Nonetheless, so at least over the weekend, the Israeli military announced that it recovered 4 bodies. And I don't recall them saying in their press release. I don't recall them saying exactly where it was found. They were found, and that may be due to operational reasons, right? But one could probably guess that, well, since they're going into Rafah, it could be Rafah, right? So I can't say for sure. I haven't looked into it, deeply enough to say for sure they were found in Rafah. But these are people. These are civilians, of course, that were. I believe at least 3 of them were taken from a music festival, were actually murdered at a music festival, and their bodies were taken into Gaza, right? And the 4th person, I think he was murdered and taken from one of the communities that was raided on October 7th. So nevertheless, now that the Israelis are we're in Rafah, at least Eastern Rafah, I think one of their primary goals is to recover, at least rescue the hostages and recover bodies of hostages. I hate to say it, but I think there are going to be more of these discoveries, right, of hostages that have been killed. Some I think have been killed on October 7th, and others after they were taken hostage, right, and they were killed in Gaza. So again, we're dealing with terrorists, and this is what terrorists do. They kill civilians, they kill hostages. So I think that's what they're doing, and you're going to start hearing, we've heard this already before, but of the Israeli military going into areas like cemeteries and digging up grave sites. And I'll tell you right now, and I know this for a fact, by the way, that they're doing it because they're looking for hostages. They're not trying to, desecrate the bodies of Palestinians. They're not trying to desecrate the dead. They're looking for hostages. So it's pretty sad, of course, but I think that's that's why they're in Rafah. I think they're going to find more of these hostages, hopefully more of them that are alive. And the interesting thing is that we really haven't talked about a lot is that Israel is slowly chipping away at Hamas's leverage here, and of course, the leverage being the hostages, right? And the more bodies, the more people that they rescue, the more hostages they rescue, whether they're alive or have passed away. It decreases or it removes the leverage that Hamas has had over the Israelis, right? Because they have hostages. So they're slowly doing that. There's still a lot of hostages, unfortunately, in the Gaza Strip. I think it's 130 something. I can't remember the exact number. Still a lot, right? But we got to remember it was like 250, I think, about that at the start of the war. So yeah, it's going to take time. And lastly, I just want to repeat this again. This whole Rafah operation, it's going to take a long time. I think if the Israelis go through with it completely, they're going to be there for a long time. Not like Khan Yunis or Gaza City, where they just pretty much just rolled right through there. This one's going to take, I think, a really long time. So we'll see if the Israelis can make it through.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I have a feeling the Israelis are going to have to go back into Khan Yunis and other places because they didn't seal them off before this operation, which is a very big mistake. On your point on leverage, well taken, Joe. Yeah, every hostage recovered, either dead or alive. Again, this is just, I know we both talk about this all the time. We hate discussing the hostage situation. It's, a lot of hard, cold calculations but they're human beings, and hostages taken by Hamas have been in captivity for 8 months now, including 5 Americans, by the way, but you wouldn't know that if you read the American press, if you were listening to the U.S. government and Biden administration. This should be something screamed from the mountaintops. And, what do we get for building that gear? Did Hamas release 1 American hostage, 2 American hostage? I'm hearing it's over $1 billion to build that thing and maintain it just over a short amount of time. I'd like for us to get some kind of return on our investment here. But yeah, the leverage though, and I think, Joe, I can't prove this, but I think this is one of the reasons. I think there unfortunately may be more dead hostages here than we think, because I think this could be a reason why Hamas is delaying on any type of agreement, because if it can't turn over live hostages, it really reduces their leverage. Now, look, I also think they believe they're winning and that they're being bailed out by there's a lot of factors here, but this, I suspect this may be playing into the calculations that Hamas is making. And, again, once they release those hostages, their leverage just decreases, either alive or dead. But the last topic, real quick, Joe, the situation in the West Bank. There was an airstrike over the last several days. Again, we know that kettle is simmering, and it has been some time. Tell us what do we need to know about that operation and what's going on in the West Bank?
Yeah, I'll be brief. So the Israelis carried out an airstrike from, actually, I think it was 2 airstrikes, one from a fighter aircraft, and another from a helicopter. Anyways, they struck a facility or a compound in the northern Gaza Strip in Jenin, and they were targeting a Hamas commander. His name was, I believe it's Ismail Hamisa. He was, again, Islamic Jihad commander who planned attacks against Israelis. Was planning attacks and had already carried out attacks against Israelis. So they targeted him, and they successfully they did eliminate him. So, and this is interesting. Just one quick observation that, let's say, it's almost June now. I'd say a year ago, the Israelis, if they were going to go after a guy like this, like Ismail, it would have just gone in with vehicles and just ground troops. A small, of course, this is a small number of troops, and either try to arrest him or eliminate him. And now, since I think July, I'd say, of last year, started seeing a lot more, these different tools, let's just say, being used against these groups, specifically aircraft, right? Drone strikes, things like that. So we're seeing a lot more of that, not only against these type of targets, but let's say against if let's say there's an operation in the West Bank, and there's a gunfight going on. The Israelis are now are tending to use airstrikes against cells that are fighting against the Israeli troops. So it's very interesting. So, again, the West Bank has not changed. It's only it's getting worse. Okay. I hate to say it, and eventually Israel will have to go into it. So I think we're going to be talking a lot more about that on Long War Journal. You're going to see more pieces about that in the near future about the West Bank. So I would look out for that, because it hasn't changed, and Israel will eventually have to do something about it.
Yeah, and I think West Bank is the most problematic area for the Israelis to operate in, given how, there's Israel, the mix with Israeli, and, the West Bank is just a network of, it's just geographically a mess for the Israelis. Yeah, at least Gaza could be contained, and Hezbollah on the north, right? There's borders, there's things, there's pros and cons to dealing with, but the West Bank, it's on the doorstep for the Israelis.
Exactly, and that's what Iran. That was the whole point of Iran. It was funding these organizations, right, increasing support, because it was on Israel's doorstep essentially. So they wanted to create a new front, and that's what they're doing by arming these organizations further than they have in the past.
Yeah, it's just part of Iran's strategy. Just keep ratcheting up the pressure, right? Yep. Pressure in the north, pressure in Gaza, pressure in the West Bank, pressure in the Red Sea, pressure with the militias, and possibly Jordan. It really, it's evil and brilliant. We don't like it, but you've got to respect it, and the Israelis have to take it seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Joe, thank you very much for the excellent conversation today.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Bill. Always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, everyone, you should be following Joe on Twitter as well. It's at Joe Trusman. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode of Generation Jihad. Just a reminder, you can listen to us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe to Generation Jihad and leave us a review, preferably a positive one, but only if we earned it. Thanks again, and we'll see you all again real soon.